So many of you don't know this because this is your first time at the talk. Maybe some people have been here before, but I have just now, this is the last talk after 6 weeks of talking nearly every day. Some days 6 hours a day. So this is quite a tour I've done in India. But you're only here for this talk, so you don't see the backstory. So this is my last one. And what a joy it's been. So if you've been to more than one talk, it's been such a joy sharing and expressing with you. And remembering love. So if this is the first time to the talk, I will give an introduction of what I talk about. I talk about two different things. And I love both of them equally, and I'm happy to work with you on either path or either one that you want to talk about. I talk about something called non-duality, not two-ness. And I also talk about working on the personal self and how to be more balanced on the human level. And I see them both as different subjects. I don't see working on the personal self as leading you to non-duality. I do see working on the personal self helps relax the person so we can talk about non-duality. If you're deeply suffering, then it's hard to talk about not two-ness. But first of all, I'll do an introduction about what non-duality is. I don't know how many people here have heard that before or listened to it, but even if you've been here many times, sometimes you need to hear it lots and lots before it begins to become clear. So what non-duality is talking about is a shift in consciousness. It's not talking about freeing you on the human level. It's talking about an energetic shift from being contracted and separate and feeling like you're in relationship with life to an expansiveness that is not divided. But that's not an intellectual thing. That's not something you can imagine or know. It's an energetical shift that happens. So right now, all there is who you are, everywhere. So that sound of the humming, the sound of my voice, the colours in the room, the other people breathing, the feeling of the floor, the feeling of space, all of that is who you truly are. This is who you truly are, what's happening. And this is home. This is all you've ever looked for. When you're suffering or when you're seeking, it doesn't feel like home. It feels like the absence of home. But this is actually home. But not for you. So when I first started listening to like radical non-duality, I don't know if I'm a radical non-duality teacher, but there was a big wave of it in the early 2000s in London, and I met a teacher called Tony Parsons, and he was so radical when I met him. Now maybe he's not radical because there's lots of other teachers and maybe we're more used to him now, but when I first went to his talks, he used to say things along the lines of, you think there's people come into this room, but there's nobody sitting in this room. There's nobody sitting here. And he used to say, you've paid me 10 euros or 10 pounds to come to this talk and you paid for nothing. There's nothing on offer here. There's nothing for sale. And before this became, I think non-duality is more popular now, so these concepts are more out there, and people have heard teachers say that many times. But I remember I was like, I've come for nothing, I paid for nothing, what? How can there be nobody sitting here? This makes no sense, but yet there was something in it, in the way that he's expressed, that knew a love, like knew something deeper of what he was talking about. There was a sweetness that I remembered. So right now you might think that you're sitting in this room, and this is actually a daydream. This isn't reality that you're sitting in a room, it's a daydream. You're having a waking sleep. So you know how when you fall asleep at night, you have a dream and you feel like that dream's really real? Well, now you're awake, but you're dreaming. And you're dreaming that you're sitting in a room. I know this sounds like Looney Tune talk, but it's actually true. That is something that I could say is true, and you can't say that very often in non-duality, that there is nobody sat here. So let's look at this idea of no body from a scientific perspective. Although I can't guarantee the science that I'm going to preach to you is accurate, I think that scientists also have a problem of science not changing. I think they think that they've discovered something and then they discover that they didn't discover something, so they too also have this problem. But I'm not as educated in science as scientists, so I try my best. So if we got out a microscope, I was going to say a telescope, but a microscope, and we decided to examine our bodies. Like, so we got out a microscope and we thought, okay, I'm going to find my body. I want to find the essence of my body. I want to find what my body is. And I don't know if you've ever taken acid and then looked at fractals on the internet or YouTube. Like, this is quite an amazing experience. It actually becomes like that with your body. You're like, okay, let me find the edge of my body. And as you look, you find that you can't find an edge of your body. You're like, oh, hang on, it gets smaller and more detailed and smaller, and there's more and more worlds the more I go in. I never actually get to an edge of my body. It turns into skin and then water and then blood and bone and molecules and particles and all these other things that I can't name. And you never actually find your body. So what is this body that we believe is sitting here? Like, where does it end? So you're like, well, it's simple, Lisa. It ends here. Here, Jesus, where have you been your whole life? Here. But when we look small at detail, you begin to never find it. You go in, you get your microscope, and you're like, this is a chair. Everybody can see it's a chair. It's quite clearly a chair. Oh, no, it is wood. It's bamboo. Okay, it's water. It's molecules, it's particles. It gets even smaller and smaller and smaller. There's nothing there. So we get to the source of the chair, and there's nothing inside the chair. The chair, what is the chair? Where is a chair? And everyone's like, well, we can see a chair. That's the chair, Lisa. Unless we get our microscope out, and then we have to ignore that and say, okay, well, that's just a little bit weird, we'll forget about it. It's amazing the worlds that we find when we look at things in detail. You never really find a thing. You see the appearance of things, but you never find it, ever. It's never found. You never manage to pin something and say, this is what it is. Also, things are always changing. Like, I can do magic now. You know how they say that enlightened people can do magic? I can do magic. I discovered this recently, that if I drink this drink, it turns into body. This is amazing. So which one is it? Is it body or drink? And then it also then can eventually turn into fertilizer for something else to grow. Isn't this wonderful? Like, everything is always changing. When I was a Buddhist, this is one of the first teachings that they wanted to teach me, that everything was changing. And I remember, this is before the internet, and I think people were more stupid before the internet. I remember sitting there and being astonished that everything changed. Like, I hadn't really figured that out by myself. I was like, everything is constantly in a state of change, and everything is dependent on all other things. You never have one thing. There's always a constant state of change happening. It's always morphing into something else. This was they really made me study this a lot, this idea of change, and that nothing is permanent, nothing stays the same, which implies, obviously, but I didn't work this out prior to the internet, that there is only one source, that everything is made of the same, that you never actually manage to separate anything out into different things. You only appear to. It's like a kaleidoscope. If you've ever looked at a kaleidoscope before, you've got all these different colours, and it's just constantly being moved to make all these different pictures, which is how this life seems to be. I'm sure science will say something different eventually, but at the moment it seems as if this life is constantly transforming to make all these different shapes and appearances, but there is no solid fixed appearance, and there is no source in the world, so there is no starting point. We cannot find a starting point, so the Buddhists would say it's circular. But you can't find the beginning of anything or the end of anything. So, let's go back to what I said. So that was my quick science class. I hope you all learnt a lot from Lisa's version of science. All the scientists are sort of like, oh. So we go back and we now sit there and we say, is there anybody sat in this room? So you're absolutely convinced, not everybody, but some people, that you're somebody that sat here. But how can this be true? How can everything that you experience and you put into your body and everything that you know lead you to that conclusion? How could you be somebody that sat here when you know so deeply that there's nothing that's solid and permanent, that your body is made up of 1 billion things to make that one body, just like this world is made up of 1 billion things to make this one world? Like if you went and became really, really big and you looked at the world, like the world, you'd begin to lose the detail. You wouldn't notice humans and animals and plants. You would just look at the world and think it was one organism. If you looked really far out, you'd think it's just one organism, and as you got deeper and deeper into it, you'd realise there's all this detail, it keeps going on and on and on and deeper, and it never ends. That there's no beginning and end to this. That's really magical. And we know this. It's so deeply embedded in our unconscious because mythology is always telling us this. Storytelling is always reflecting this back to us. If you really look at stories, we're always being told that everything is infinite and that nothing is finite. So how can you be a body sat here listening to me? So if you're not a body sitting here listening to me, who are you? Who's listening to me? I would suggest that your answer is in the most intimate, direct experience, the most intimate sense of being. And if you go to the most intimate sense of being, you'll realise that what's experiencing itself now is life. Life is experiencing itself. And life is not a solid thing. It's no thing. So it doesn't come from anywhere. It doesn't come from a place. It's not a solid thing. And it's everything. And that's really pretty amazing. You aren't somebody that's sitting here experiencing, that's limited, that's contained, that's finite. That's how it appears, but that's not the actuality. Who you are is infinity, is life, is something that doesn't begin, doesn't end, even beyond the idea of infinite. And it's here. You find that here, in this, right here, not in what you think. So let's go to another example now. So if you think, okay, we've now come to the conclusion that I'm not a body sat here. There isn't a fixed body sat here. There is something that's always changing and moving. It just appears like I'm a body sat here. Okay, we're happy with that. So maybe you think you're a soul that's sat here. That's what they often teach us, is that we're souls inside the body. We're something solid inside the body. So what would be a soul to you? So maybe you think you're things you've done, like your experiences, that you were born at a certain date. But with the body, we've unpicked that idea of birth, because if nothing starts and begins, you didn't begin at birth. That would be an impossibility, that you just suddenly began out of nowhere at birth. But if we look at life, we realize nothing starts and nothing ends. So that's not the beginning of you. It's just the beginning of that appearance of that body. So if we establish that, let's look at this idea that you're experienced, that you're somebody that is from Europe, America, South America, Asia, Africa, Russia, and that you're 23 years old and you've had all these experiences, that you're in love, that you're rich, that you're poor, whatever your story is that who's sitting here looking now? Is that who's sitting experiencing these ideas? Or is this a waking dream that's sitting there happening, just like your dream at night, but while you're awake? Is that who you are? That dream of you? Because that comes and goes, those ideas of your experience, and it's always changing because you add experiences, and then when you're in a different mood, your memory of the past changes. So when you're happy, you have had a great past. When you're sad, it's a terrible, terrible past. These stories are always changing, and you get new ones, and your ideas change. Who you tell changes. So if that's not who's looking now, then who is it? What's left? So it's not a body looking. It's not your experiences looking. It's not an age that's looking. It's not a job or a career that's looking. It's not what your parents told you about yourself that's looking, like you're a bad child, you're good, you're white, you've got blonde hair. That's not what's looking. You're not the body. You're not your experiences. You're not your behavior. You're not a good person looking or a bad person, because good and bad is, again, undefinable. Like you're good in comparison to someone and then bad comparison to someone else. So that also cannot be a fixed thing that's looking. So who is looking? Who's sitting here looking? So if you can get past the waking dream, if you can just allow that to float on past, recognize that thoughts appear, feelings appear, sensations, smells, sights, all these different sensory inputs are coming and going. They come into consciousness and they disappear, and they come in and they disappear, and they come in and disappear. What's left? And that's who you are. What's left? What is always permanent, always here? Life. And life is always here. Life. This is. Have you ever managed to escape life? Have you just been like, let's pause life. We're just going to put it on pause and we're going to go and stand somewhere else outside of life. Maybe you think, yes, I have. I've experienced the afterlife, but it's still things happening. It's still life in the way. Just a different form, different reality. Have you ever paused what's happening? What's happening is your most fundamental sense of being, but your mind is saying to you, what's happening is happening to a separate entity inside my body, and it's different from me. And it's always giving this division of subject, of subject, object. Subject, object. I'm in here, the world's out there. That is not your direct experience. That's a waking dream. Your direct experience is everything. 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 And this is love, total unconditioned love, the acceptance, and it's not even acceptance, it's an intimacy with what is. And this is who you are. It's never left you, life. You might think and imagine it can, but that's your imagination. You might think, I can die and I'll be kicked out of life. But have you ever noticed anything being kicked out of life? Like, did anything ever like suddenly just whoop and disappear into a black hole? Or did it slowly transform into other things? So if a family member or your dog or somebody you knew died, you witnessed the body transform into something else. If you imagine a soul inside of that body, then you think that disappeared. But if you realize that what you imagine to be a soul is a person, is a condition of that instrument that was moving, like the behavior of that cat, its particular personality, and it doesn't die, its particular personality, those genetics and that energy then transforms into something else. But consciousness, life, doesn't die. Did you ever know life to die? It's impossible. You've never experienced non-existence, and you never will experience non-existence. It's always. And this life requires consciousness. The The Buddhists would say consciousness too isn't it, but consciousness is a very convenient word to call it by, and I'm happy to go with consciousness. So let's hit the word consciousness for a while. So there is always consciousness. So consciousness is not talking about being conscious or unconscious of personal dynamics. So being conscious that you were unconscious, that you were being passive-aggressive to someone. Not that. I'm talking about the consciousness that disappears if the doctor gives you an injection and then does an operation on the body. I'm talking about that consciousness. That consciousness never, in fact, disappears. You cannot have life without consciousness. The Zen Buddhists, or Dzogchen would say, I don't know who it comes from actually, they would say, if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? So this is the same thing. Do you ever experience life, or does life happen without consciousness? What's your experience? Can you ever have life without consciousness of it? So many spiritual traditions and science, now part of science begins to imply this, that all things inherently have consciousness in them. The consciousness doesn't arise with a body arises inside of consciousness. And what's your experience? So there is consciousness now, there is life happening, there is consciousness instantly of my voice. You didn't put any effort into being conscious of it, it just happens. Unless you put earplugs in or run out of the room, you can't help but hear my voice. You can put your attention on something else, but it happens. The same with the sensations in the body. There is consciousness instantly, without any time. It's instantaneous. It's totally timeless consciousness. It's not like something happens and then consciousness is like slowly coming. Okay, we're conscious of it now. It always happens instantly. Consciousness is instantaneous. There's instantaneous consciousness of what's behind me, of the speaker, of my voice, of this recording instrument, of the other people. Instantly there. Consciousness is in all things. Instantly. Do you ever experience an outside of consciousness? Do you ever experience life outside of consciousness? There would be no life if there was no consciousness. You only ever experience life in consciousness. It is inside consciousness, not outside. It is it. It's not even inside it, it is it. You can't have life without consciousness. This is your direct experience that I'm pointing to. Like, it's not something that isn't your experience. I'm asking you if you can ever show to me an experience without consciousness. You can think about it, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about direct experience, not your imagination. Your imagination plays many tricks on you. So just come back to experience and trust that your experience knows everything. Trust your experience. So not what you imagine. So imagine you think, I can think of many times when I wasn't conscious. Like when I went to the doctors and I got knocked out and they did an operation on my body, I wasn't conscious and yet life happened. But that's your imagination. You don't have memory of that happening. You don't know if you're conscious or not. You just don't have memory. You could also think, well, my family live in Europe and they're all having a particular experience and I'm not conscious of it. So this is what your brain does, and it divides consciousness up. But they have an experience and I'm not conscious of it, so there's obviously life happening without my consciousness. But that's your imagination, that is the way it is. Why would you take your imagination to be more true than your experience? Your experience is there's never outside of consciousness. Never. The experience is life and consciousness are the same. Your experience also is that consciousness isn't inside the body. A storyteller tells you it's inside the body. So right now, are you conscious of me inside your body? Do you find an edge to where your consciousness ends and my words begin? Like, can you, in your head, imagine where your ending point is, where the ending of your consciousness is? Is that possible for your consciousness to end and then to hear me? Like, so it's like my consciousness ends and then I somehow am conscious of Lisa. Is this possible? So how could that happen? The experience is I'm inside your consciousness. I'm inside it. I'm not outside of it. That's your experience. It's your mind that plays tricks on you. Your mind imagines what's not here and then believes there is a life happening without my consciousness. Your experience is all there is consciousness. All there is life. Why would you trust thinking that's not here, thoughts that aren't here, over your direct, intimate experience? Your imagination creates the energetic divide and makes it feel like you are inside the body. You aren't inside the body. The body arises inside consciousness. Misconsciousness. The body is like a microphone, is like a camera. It's an instrument which interprets, remembers, thinks about. It's not alive. It's not conscious. It's not conscious. It's wonderful. This is so freeing, this subject. It's love. I know your mind keeps thinking of lots of excuses. Mine was the same. It was like, yeah, but, what about all the other angles? What about all the other consciousnesses? There's lots of other consciousnesses. That's thinking. What's your experience? Your experience knows. You know so deeply in your heart who you are. It's the most intimate sense of being. You know you're not a thought. You know thoughts aren't truth. You know there's a deeper reality. And you know you have all the answers. Your mind is the confusion. Your mind is the waking dream. So let's look at a dream at night as a representation of this. So at night, it's really amazing. So I've been speaking about this subject for 8 years now. And I couldn't do this 8 years ago like this. I couldn't go for it like this, because our society just wasn't quite ready 8 years ago, and now you can really go for it. I can really sit here and go for it, and it doesn't feel like everybody's half falling asleep, or people are like, oh God, I hate this. Everyone's like, there is like an openness to it. Like this is really beautiful. There's a real big openness to it now. So let's do the dream analogy. So at night time we all dream sometimes. Not in deep sleep, but there's that period before deep sleep where we have a dream. And when we dream, that dream often feels super real unless you're lucid dreaming. But it feels like it's reality. So what happens is you get into bed, you shut your eyes, and you don't lose consciousness, but you lose this reality. Your mind doesn't stay in this reality anymore, and your mind begins to imagine, just I suppose inside the brain, or we don't know where it is, but it begins to imagine a different reality. And they say that dreaming is a way of us processing what's happened during the day. So often it's related to things that have happened during the day. But let's just make up a dream. I used to have a reoccurring dream, and I'll just use that as an example because it's easy for me to talk about. So I grew up in a place called Maidenhead, which is just outside Heathrow Airport near London. And my parents had a big back garden, and the aeroplanes used to turn over our garden. It's not as noisy as you think, actually, but it's really miraculous when you see a plane low down, these really big planes low down, almost turning on their side. Like, I just loved it. And it depends on if they're circling or what they're doing, but generally I'd always see them turn as a child in the sky. So my dream was at night time, and it was a reoccurring dream for many years, was that the airplane would fall out of the sky when it was on its side. So it would turn, and then suddenly, boof. And then the dream was it falling out of the sky, and then it was always my reaction afterwards, whether I ran to help people, whether I ran away and hid, whether my family was involved. There was always different variations, but same dream. So this happens to all of us, and many of us have reoccurring dreams or reoccurring themes that happen in our dream. And when we dream, we think it's totally real, and we think it makes sense. When we wake up into this reality again, we can realize there's lots of things that do not make sense and are missing, but we don't notice it in the dream. It feels really real. So you dream at night, and we don't know where it's happening, but we presume it's somewhere in the body or in the brain, this imagery. There's a consciousness. So the consciousness that's here in this life is there. There's a consciousness of what's happening. And we can call it Lisa's consciousness in that dream, but it's actually there's just consciousness. And Lisa's part of this dream. The Lisa, the character, is part of this dream. But in that dream, I often dream Lisa as well. So Lisa's in the dream, and Lisa is the experiencer in that dream at night. She looks like this normally. Sometimes she's different, but she looks like this. She may be older or younger, and she's experiencing a dream. But she doesn't know that. She's experienced, to her, in my dream, she feels like she's in a real world with all these objects that are separate from her. And so when the aeroplane falls out of the sky, she really has this panic of what to do. Like, what do I do when the aeroplane falls out of the sky? And she's got to choose whether she runs to help people or runs away. That's predominantly the drama that I used to go into. Which one? And to say I decide to run in this particular dream, I run towards the aeroplane and I help people. To me, in that dream, even though there's obviously bits missing, like I can't remember running there, like it suddenly time disappears and I'm at the aeroplane and I'm pulling someone out, and it feels really real, like I'm pulling somebody out or I'm seeing fire, like it feels like there is fire. But the actuality is it's my body's dream. So I'm actually dreaming the whole thing. So I'm the character, Lisa, in my dream at night. I'm the aeroplane crashing. I'm the characters, I'm everybody. But I believe I'm one character in that dream and it becomes very real to me. But when I pick somebody up and help them and speak to them, I'm actually speaking to myself in that dream. And this is quite obvious to us. We know this, that in the dream everyone you speak to is actually part of your brain. It's a figment of your imagination, that you have created it all, that you're the dreamer of that dream. But you feel like you're separate to all these things. So what's the same thing that's in that dream and this dream? What's the one permanent in both? The one permanent is my consciousness. The dream is changing in both realities. But my consciousness in both dreams is always experiencing through a character, because you need to be a character. In order to experience different objects, you need to identify with one object. Otherwise it will be a real mess. If you're identified with all objects, this will be a very difficult dream. Maybe we'll all dream that tonight. Might be stuck. Nothing might happen. Get stuck. So we identify with one object and we see it from that particular angle. It's the same way we do films as well. We normally are only looking from one particular angle in the film. We're not looking from multiple. Sometimes we do in the film, but it's normally one angle we look from. So we look from this one particular angle, but what's the same in both dreams is consciousness, the perception of the dream. And whose consciousness is it? Is it Lisa, my character, in this dream, in this world? But does Lisa own that consciousness? In my dream at night, it doesn't belong to Lisa, the character. Lisa, the character, is appearing in my consciousness in my dream at night. She comes and goes. When she dies, when that dream dies, the consciousness comes back to this body. So is it Lisa's consciousness in this dream? That's what most people project. They think it's my consciousness as a body. It's not. It's God's. It's not. Doesn't belong to Lisa. It's God's. So right now, you think you're that character and you've got the woes of that character and the struggle of that character, but actually you are, who's experiencing this dream is God. It is God looking out, it is God creating everything. Now then the question is, what is God? God is actually a dog that comes from the future. I was pretty surprised when I discovered this, but it's in the, it's in there, it's just back to front, it's like a reflection, like dog God. I was surprised. So this is the question, and you actually find it out in the experience who God is. So you've always been told that God was this yellow, I got told this, I don't know if someone told me or I imagined this, but I got told that God was a yellow man with a white beard that lived on a cloud. And maybe had a hat on, but he was up there. And that one day he would judge me as to whether I'd been a good girl or a bad girl. And I always had a nice feeling about God, not church and the authority, but I had a nice feeling about God. But actually, God is your essence. It's not quite like that. I understand why the mythology formed in Christianity, and I think that it was actually talking about non-duality Christianity, that Jesus was actually talking about this. And then it formed into that mythology, and it's often to help psychologically people. But that's a different story. But right now, if you want to find God, you find God in the looker. So I remember when I had this awakening experience, you have all these different awakening experiences on this path, where I just suddenly realized that God was looking out of my eyes. So I'd had all these, I knew it was consciousness, I knew all of these different things, and then suddenly I was like, God? And it was like real beauty and love arose, that everywhere I went, I was being, as the character, I was being held by God in everything. I never left him or her. It never went away. In my worst, terrible nightmare, in the most beautiful ecstasy, I was there absolutely surrounded in that love and presence of God. It was the most deepest, intimate sense of being. It's who I am. It's who you are. And this really profoundly changed things. Because even though in life there can be beautiful things and ugly things and all types of things as this life, there was now a home that I knew so deeply that never left me. So I could be laying on the street dying with no one around to love me, and I was in the greatest lover ever. It was she, he, it. Life was never leaving me. I never got kicked out or abandoned. That was mostly my deepest fear as a separate entity. Well, I was going to be kicked out and abandoned, like by life, like psychologically, that at some point I'd be kicked out and abandoned. But I could never be kicked out and abandoned, no matter how naughty I was. If I was a very naughty little girl, I still got life. If I was very well behaved, or whatever I did, whatever I lost, whatever left, and through the years, I'm now rolling towards 40. There's been characters and people and things that I've lost that have died, and they're still here because they were never limited to that thing. You never really lose yourself. Everything that's looking at you is God, is that same consciousness. It's the same energy. So if you've had a family member that's died recently, last year my dad passed, he's still here. He never really can leave me. Like his energy, his essence is still here. His character has moved into something else. That habit of that personality, the genetics, like part of the genetics have come into this body. So on the human level, this body carries on part of, and what he taught me, his knowledge, his information is passed on as well into this body. And then some of it went into the ground. The worms got some of it. Oh no, it wasn't. It was a fire. That sounds really cold. I'm being cold, but I'm not meaning to be cold. Like it's, on one level, on the human level, it's deeply sad when your parent passes. But on another level, there's something very beautiful because his essence is at the end, he was very sick, and his essence is no longer seemingly limited. He's now non-limited. He can hear me. He can't not hear me. Like it was never his character that was listening to me. He hears me in everything. I speak him. Like you can't separate out from that essence. The form definitely changed, and the form, I do this rebirth that Buddhists talk about, I do believe in that. Like some energy, and I don't know how it works, but an energy is passed on of that form. But that's not him. That's not who he was. That was not who I knew that character, but on the ultimate level, who he was is this infinite space of life. And all of you have experienced this, like loss of an animal, of a person, things. but you never really lose them. It's impossible. So if you want to speak to your loved ones again, you can. Just right now. It's the same energy that's listening, just a different brain interpreting it. So my dad had his particular quality of the way he saw the world. There's particular responses, but the same consciousness knows. So that's non-duality. Now, just when I say that's non-duality, I say it with so much confidence. I also, I would like to give the disclaimer that I don't think that non-duality can be put into words. So even though I speak differently about it than other teachers, I don't see this as the right way, because you can't really grasp non-duality into words. It's like you're communicating about it, and it's really actually the innocent sounds that are being made that's true non-duality. It's not the sense, the logic. But that's my best current way of putting it into logic. But then there's this other part here that's just this innocence that's shining, that's speaking to you, that's right here and reminding you, like, this is it, and it's coming through from emptiness, this instant, and it's not sensical. It doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. Like I've made sense seemingly for some of the talk, but then it doesn't really matter, because there's this consciousness that's here, whether it makes sense or not, whether you like me or not. It's still here, it's still this, still that live presence. So now I'm opening up to questions.